perfectly clear that for most cognitively modern humans who've lived for 100,000 years, they never had anything that we would describe as architecture. And probably just over 10,000 years ago, they started producing what we would recognize as architecture. And the question that I ask is, why did that happen? And what purpose was architecture playing that hadn't been required before? Architecture is one of the things that creates representation of time itself. What can tell you what 1,000 years is like better than a city? Or what can tell you that you are connected to your ancestors and that you pass on values to your ancestors, to your children, better than the continuity of the built fabric of a place? It seems to me that this representation of deep time is the fundamental vocation of architecture. I'm Níall McLaughlin and I'm the architect of Saltmarsh House. We were contacted here at the studio by a woman who asked us to design what was a tiny pavilion house on the coast on the Isle of Wight. We wanted to make a structure that was incredibly lightweight, and so we began to think about this kind of cat's cradle of very lightweight steel tubes that would hold up an overhanging roof. That was really the beginning of the idea of the project. So you have this roof here that's made of these sort of pyramidal roof lights, and then you can see this kind of cat's cradle structure. And then when you look along the length of it, you see that simple A-B rhythm. So it's A, B, A. And this A is the same as that A, but this one has got all the solid objects tucked underneath it. And this has got the veranda that opens out towards the sea. And then you have this central space that balances those two things out on each side. And then you have this little row of boxes which are tucked in like pieces of furniture. The bathroom, the bedroom, and the kitchen. And each one has its own separate box which will then look out into the woodland. You walk across this bridge that connects the land with the pavilion, and you arrive on this deck, which is the first bay really of those 4 bays of the main structure. And it's also the one that shows you most clearly what the structure is. You got those 4 poles that are connected together at regular intervals, giving you this quadruple column, which holds up the roof structure above it. You get this amazing view across the marshes. With the high tide, you get this amazing reflective surface, bringing in the light. You have this amazing wildlife here with the birds come and go, which is an absolute beautiful thing to witness. And here we are in the main space. That's the dining area under these large roof lights, and back there is the seating area with the fireplace with your 3 large windows looking out across the marshes and the harbour. So the 3 large guillotine windows are all motorised. You can open and close them with these 3 switches here. So you simply flick the switch and then those windows start opening. Each of the panes weighs about half a ton, and they're counterweighted with the same amount of metal, so that the motor that opens and closes them has to do just a little bit of work. A large part of making this internal space really bright and light is having those 6 triangular roof lights that sit above the seating and the dining area here. Now that the sun's come out, we get a bit of benefit of it coming through and washing through the space. So you have this ever-changing play of shade and light together with the sea coming in and out, which makes the space so special. Also from the inside, you can really read those 4 bays of roof structure, each with this pyramidal roof sitting on top, which reference the repetitive boathouses from across the harbour, but also the Victorian greenhouses that used to exist at the top of the hill from the Victorian times. Over here, we've allowed for these wooden shutters to be integrated in the back of those benches. So they come up to a certain height. They still allow plenty of light to come in and for you to be able to see out and be aware of the weather and the landscape around it, but it offers you a certain degree of privacy.
All these shutters are decorated with these beautiful hand-painted wallpapers that make a connection between the shutters and the landscape beyond. When you're looking at the grasses, you sort of feel reminded of the marshland behind it. And here we have the seating area with a couple of sofas and armchairs, creating a nice and cozy atmosphere for a coldish winter evening when, you know, you can light a fire, sit here and just being in the space. The fireplace sits on a granite plinth which connects it back to the earthwork and to the landscape outside, whilst also being just a non-combustible hearth to the fireplace. So here you have the bathroom pod with the shower on the left and the bathroom over here. All the doors are sliding doors. Open the window, which opens fully, and you get the view of the garden and the woodland beyond. And for a little bit of additional privacy, there's also shutters here that then have in turn mirrors fitted to the inside. So this is the middle pod, the bedroom, with 2 doors either side, plenty of inbuilt furniture here. This is the only bedroom in the pavilion. It's mostly used by either the clients themselves or guests to stay down here. It's an amazing place to be, close to the garden but also extremely close to the water. Just like the bathroom window, this opens fully up, so if you wanted to, you could have the completely opening window to the garden space. So here you have the kitchen pod. With everything a small kitchen needs. There's a dishwasher and fridge over here, and otherwise there's just plenty of storage. Again, the window opens fully. There's a little step outside, so if you need to nip in or out of the building, it's almost like a back entrance door as well. It's always amazing to come to a finished building and to experience a space that one has thought about in a lot of detail before. We've been studying this building so much in the office, and we sort of almost knew every nut and bolt in the building. But when you actually walk into the space, it's always different. And it's been a great pleasure to come into the space when it was finished, because it felt, in some ways, exactly the way we wanted it and we designed it.
You can see in this image here, we have a simple detail like this at the edge of the building, where the width of the window frame separates an internal and external structure. So this cat's cradle you see here is brought down to the ground on the inside, but equally, if you looked on the outside, there's a paired column on the other side that allows you to see it being brought down to the ground. But for architects like us who are interested in detailing, the proof of the concept always comes down to what do you do when that's then turning a corner? And so we were really thinking about this as a problem that we couldn't resolve. And it just happened that I was on a field trip with my students. We went to Jaipur in India, and we visited this beautiful place on the Amber Fort, which is called the Elephant Pavilion. I realized that this 16th century structure had exactly the same principle of paired columns. So I lay on the floor of the pavilion and made a drawing of the elephant columns. And what I realized was not just that they had developed this beautiful architecture of paired columns, but that when it comes to the corner, they had turned the pair into a 4. And this gave us the principle which we used for turning the corner in the building. And one of the things that we had to do to achieve that was to get a right-angle piece of triple glazing. It means when you're standing inside the building, you just get this tiny glimpse past the column of light coming through. We realized that we designed a building that would be a real challenge for most builders to build. And we were fortunate to work with some extraordinary builders, a company called Millimeter, who are based on the south coast of England. You can see the complexity of this 7-way intersection of tiny thin rods, and they were able to use robotic tools in their own workshop to build from those. It was an interesting process where the whole building was mocked up in the workshop before they brought it to site. So they knew that what they were constructing would be possible to do. That really helped because the site is a bird sanctuary. For a lot of the time we had an ecologist on site with a notebook wandering around telling the builders the impact that their work was having on these rare species of birds. And so the builders had to be super careful at every turn that they weren't doing anything to disrupt the mating or nesting of these birds at different times. So having had the opportunity to completely rehearse it beforehand and then make it again on site was a very good way of doing it, because we were able to retain a degree of tact in relation to this very fragile wildlife. The landscape around it hasn't been created yet. So that sense of it having its back to woodland will make a big difference to the way that you understand the building. And I like to think about it as being a bit less kind of machiney and precise and precious when I go back in 20 years' time, but has got the light of the leaves coming through trees and the sense of having aged into its place. Maybe it would feel more ordinary, less so obviously spectacular, and more kind of balanced with its environment, but that always takes time. I think it's really curious when you work on a building for quite a few years and you've been working on models and drawings and details. The project becomes a long litany of small decisions that have to be resolved, but it becomes a procedure of working through small things in order to achieve a larger thing. And for me, one of the most extraordinary moments is when everything that you brought together through a million small decisions is suddenly just a piece of the world. And I've never really quite got over that. What I'm always looking for is to have the opportunity to go to the building and to try and find some moment of stillness that I can just sit in it and try and be there and say, is this what I intended? Does this feel right? And then watch the light of the day changing. And at that moment, as an architect, you have to just let go of it and say, right, it's not mine anymore. Off it goes into the world. And then once I've done that, I never think of the buildings as being particularly something that I made anymore or have my authorship. I just think of them as being bits of the world.